Hello. I have to say what a pleasure it is to be here, and not just because this is the first time I've been let out of Australia in 2 years post-COVID, but it's so wonderful to be around such passionate people. And I think that is important to acknowledge, because it is a pleasure to be here, and not everyone is here today. In fact, there are 2,200 people who aren't here, not at this conference, but in fact they aren't alive today, because yesterday they reached a point in their life where they believed it was a better option for them to die by suicide than to be here today. Another 2,200 people will suicide today and tomorrow and the day after that and the day after that, and before this year is out, roughly 800,000 people will have died by suicide. And this figure's from the World Health Organization, so these are officially recorded suicides. So chances are the figure is actually much higher than this. And I know this maybe isn't the most uplifting way to start a presentation, but if we're going to talk about people, if we're going to talk about the future of mental health and your role in it, I think it's really important to acknowledge the pointy end of this conversation. I'm going to step away from suicide for a moment. The term mental health, mental well-being, it's used a lot, and if that's what we're going to be talking about for the next 10, 15 minutes or so, it's probably really important for us to understand, or at least have some common language about what that actually is. As Andrew Magnuson said this morning, we need words to describe the things that we're talking about. So I'm going to give you all roughly 30 seconds just to turn to the person next to you, and I want you to ask them the question, what is mental well-being? How do you define mental well-being? 30 seconds, off you go. Okay, in 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. If I had the time to go around and ask every single person in this room, we'd probably have roughly 1,000, 1,500 different answers. And in some ways that's good, because the world of mental well-being is actually really diverse, is really complex, and finding the right words can sometimes be a little bit of a challenge. What I'd like to do is share with you just one model or one way of thinking about how to define mental well-being that I find often works for me. This morning we're talking a lot about planet, so I'm going to use the global ecosystem as, I guess, the metaphor. There are kind of three things about the global ecosystem, if I can be really reductive for a moment, to consider. First of all is geography. That's effectively where in the world are you. If you're in a desert, its baseline is just going to be drier than elsewhere in the world. If you're, say, at the top of the Himalayas, its baseline is going to be much colder than the rest of the world. That's geography. Second is weather. We know what that is. That's the stuff that comes and goes day to day. Is it rainy? Is it sunny? Are there floods? Etc. And then lastly, we have climate, which are the longer-term trends and the longer-term things that influence that. So are we in a period of cooling or warming? Have we entered the industrial era, where there's a whole range of things that are going to affect weather and the other factors? And when we combine all this, that's really our global ecosystem. And if we think about this through, I guess, a mental lens instead, and just simply add the word mental to the front of it, what does this mean? Well, mental geography, again, is our baseline. Are you someone who is naturally prone to anxiety? Do you have an underlying mental health condition, perhaps bipolar or psychopathy or something else? That's your mental geography. Then we have the mental weather. This is a thing we're probably really familiar with and probably have the best words to describe. This is how we're feeling. Are we happy? Are we sad? What is happening moment to moment? And lastly, we have mental climate. Those longer-term influencing factors. Are we working in a really stressful sector? Are we in positive relationships? What sort of traumas do we have? Those things will all influence what is effectively what I like to call mental ecosystem. And I like this idea of the mental ecosystem as opposed to just using the term mental well-being, because I think if you're new to the space, sometimes mental well-being conversations can become really binary. You're either mentally healthy or you're not. Whereas once you start to think about it through the lens of an ecosystem, you start to realize how much, and to steal some words from April Rinner from before, how much this is all in flux, and this is constantly changing. And so if the mental ecosystem is how we define mental well-being, that begs another question. And again, I'm going to get you to turn to the person next to you and ask them the question, what do you want your mental well-being to be? What is the goal that we want for mental well-being? 30 seconds, off you go. And 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. If we get to do this later, can I just do my presentation singing on top of the piano? That would be lovely. Often when I talk to people about this question, what is the goal here? Where do we want to go? What is our aim? More often than not, the types of answers that people give are often based around this idea of happiness. How do we be happier in our lives? Or how do we reduce negative emotions? And there's a couple of challenges with that, and a couple of reasons why I don't love that model. And the reason for that is, if we think about this again through the lens of an ecosystem, it's impossible to be happy 100% of the time. As humans, it's just a physical impossibility for us to be happy 100% of the time. And therefore, if happiness is the goal, and that is what success is, then therefore, by definition, anything other than happiness becomes failure. And I don't think that's a particularly useful or helpful mindset to have. And the third reason is that all emotions are valid. There's a reason why over millions and millions of years we've evolved to have complex emotions. There can be passion and purpose in anger. There can be clarity and reflection in sadness. All of these emotions are really valid. And like the ecosystem, too much sun, you might love sunshine, but if all you ever have is sunshine, that's not a healthy ecosystem. You need the rain, you need the storms, you need everything in that ecosystem working together. And so when I think about what is my goal or my aim when it comes to mental well-being, I often think about it through this lens. To live a life where I can successfully navigate my mental ecosystem. And there's a few reasons why I choose those words specifically. First of all, when I talk about navigating, it implies an element of that I've got control over this. I may not have control over all things at all times, but there are certain things that I can control. And especially through the lens of the mental ecosystem of what's the geography I can change, what's the weather that I can change, and what's the climate I can change. I also use the word successful in there, and that implies that can change depending on the day or the week or the month or the year. Today here presenting in a foreign country in front of 2,000 people, I need a very different mental headspace than, say, 2 years ago we got a call from the doctors saying my mum had been rushed to hospital, and if we wanted to see her still alive, then we needed to get on the first plane up to Cairns. It's a very different mental mindset or mental ecosystem that's required in that moment. And all of those things are valid. And actually at that time, crying for a day in a dark room by myself is exactly what was needed and what was healthy. If I was to do that today, maybe not. So the idea of the successful navigation implies that it can change. And fundamentally, all of this comes back to the fact that you are the purpose generation. You are going to be the future leaders, leading projects for the planet, for people, for peace. And none of those things that you will do will be as effective if you don't fundamentally understand your own or others' mental well-being around you. It just won't. And even if you don't go on to be the future CEOs and politicians of tomorrow, the friends, the family, the people around you, how you understand your own mental well-being and their mental well-being as well is really critical. And so hopefully these two models give you a little bit more language around how to think about mental well-being. Because to jump back to the original statistic of 800,000 people will have died by suicide by the end of this year, this is something that we can literally change, you and me. But it requires us to unpack and understand mental well-being better. Thank you.